L'chaim. Louis Nishmas Yahrtzeit, Rabbeinu Yehuda Leva, Ben Harav Betzalo, right, the Maharal Prague. Today is his Yahrtzeit, and I'm one of his descendants. As many of you know, I was originally planning weeks ago to be in Prague on this great day, but Min HaShamayim, it didn't work out, and I understand now why. Because if I would have been in Prague today, it would have been very hard for me to be in Plano, Texas tomorrow for a long weekend of being Marbitz Torah, and being Ma'or the Am to Tshuva, particularly to spread the Torah of the Maharal, because the main thing is to, spread his Torah. That's the Ivrahim Haim Zichronam, the words of the Torah. That is their living memory, and that's what causes them to even be alive. Svasam Dovavos Bakever. So instead of paying tribute to the dead, we're actually paying tribute to the eternal life of his Torah, and it's the neshama that shines through his Torah, and the Torah which originally shone into this world through his neshama, which is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about a little bit about his legacy, and it's in two parts. There's his legacy, as in what his derech is, what his style is, and what he accomplished, and then there's also his place in the revelation of Torah, the long chain of the revelation of Torah. And it's something which I've spoken about in the past, but just today on the Yahrtzeit of the Maharal, I had a big insight in how to explain it even better than I have in the past. Right? We know that, seemingly the earlier generations were much bigger than us, right? But we have more information than they did. And more information, I mean, not just that a lot of things that were left ba'al peh or left up for derivation, right, have been codified and written down, right? That it's no longer something to be figured out, but it's already codified law, right? So we've gone through that process, which in itself may not necessarily be indicative of anything great on our part. They get all the credit for having, done the research and written it down and passing it on to us, right? But there is, still not just information as what has accumulated by us because it was handed down by all the different generations, but there is actually information that is more accessible to the average Jew than in earlier times, right? And is particularly in the field of which the Maharal was a big player, and that's the field of Jewish philosophy in general and Kabbalah in particular. So, of course, earlier generations knew more, right? And yet, the information of the Arizal, certainly if we believe Rav Shimon Bar Yochai knew it all, right? But he and a select few, and even that, didn't make it fully openly spelled out in the Zohar. It's just encoded there, right? And the Zohar itself also for the few, and it was revealed. And the Zohar itself addresses that in Parshas Naso. It says that Sefer Zohar, the Dorim Basroin, right? Ubei Yivkun Minglusa Barachamim. I paraphrase, but it says there roughly that the Zohar already, foresaw that it would be revealed to the later generations, to give the later generations a taste from the Eitz HaChaim and get us out of the gullus with mercy. Right? Another thing that we should think about, in the tough times that are here already. Yes, we are in a recession, and it's also not just a recession, but there are plenty of other things that are being swept under the rug, and we're not addressing of the deep sorrows that we are in. Not just in Gashus, and not just security-wise, but in Ruchnius. Right, and the antidote to that is, the Sisrei Torah, the Sefer Azor, and everything that is encoded there, that was decoded by the Ari, but still needs further, being worked over to be accessible to people like me and you, which the Maharal was definitely a part of that process. And I'll explain, even though the Maharal was before the revelation of Torah of the Ari, but I'll get to that in detail. But I do want to explain that it seems that it's not just that we have more information because everyone just wrote down their research and passed it on. So, of course, it all accumulated down by us, right? But it's what we have access to information that used to be very hidden, right? Right? And even this stuff that we say, it's what did we do? It was all accumulated and handed down, yeah. But when it was first thought of, it was done in a small group of scholars, and now it's the wide treasure of all Jews, right? One could argue that's the nature of once you put it in a book, right? But we know it's a little bit more than that, right? And let me explain this, okay? Torah comes from heaven to earth, and that's God's will to put Torah on earth, and it's a process that will go on till the end of time, as the Maharal, the Bar Elul says, so I make a bracha, baruch atah Hashem, no say not Torah, present tense. Matan Torah never stopped. After all, it's an infinite Torah. So it could not be fully given, ownership title of ownership was transferred on Shavuos. But of course, communicating everything that's in the Torah from heaven to earth takes time. It takes forever. And every generation is a part of it, right? So now Moshe knew everything, right? But everything he knew didn't necessarily get taught. Right? He wasn't licensed to openly teach everything that he knew. He knew everything. And by virtue of him knowing everything, and he came to earth, so that already transferred the bailus, the ownership of Torah from heaven to earth. Right? But did he teach absolutely everything that he knew? He taught whatever Am Yisrael was able to receive. And it could be that Yoshua knew more than the average Jew, because lo yomish mitocha oil, he was always there. He was always, picking up everything he could pick up, right? And that's why he had a special mission of guarding the Torah Sheba'al Peh, even though it was the Moshe Rabbeinu taught it evenly to all the Shivin Skedim, really evenly to all the Jewish people at least once, right? As the Rambam brings from the Gemara, the Kachi Seder Mishnah, right? but Moshe Rabbeinu let's take Moshe Rabbeinu case in point. He went to heaven and learned everything, right? What takes time is for the Torah to flow from heaven to earth. He went up to heaven and got it all. And also in earlier generations, maybe they knew everything we know. They just weren't, they just didn't talk that way, or they didn't write it down. So let's say earlier generations knew what the Ksais and the Sivas knew, right? Not that we necessarily have to believe, but let's say, right? But it's, they had it because their heads were very heavenly. They tapped in to things that were not popularly yet revealed yet. So there's how great people, Moshe Rabbeinu being the prime example, he goes to heaven. So yes, he knows all of Torah because he went to heaven. But for us little earthlings, who are stuck on earth, we need to wait for Torah to trickle down. And the Torah that and it trickles down to us, everything, davar yafeh bi'ito, everything at the right time. Right, that when the Torah trickles down to us to our phase in history, Torah has indeed trickled down, not just from heaven to earth, but trickled down in the way that it's expressed. The Torah, when it reaches Olam Atzilus, looks one way. When it reaches Olam Abriya, it looks another way. Yitzir looks another way, and Olam Atzilus looks another way, and they are parallel to the four levels of Pshat, Jewish, Remes, Sod, as is well known, but also as it trickles through the different generations. So let's say we believe that Tanoim and Amoraim knew what the Ketsos and the Sivas know, but they didn't talk that language. Torah doesn't look that way in the world of the Tanoim and Amoraim. It looks like the way it looks in the Mishnah, right? And that was enough for them. It's not enough for us. It was enough for them. It sufficed, right? It was in the language. It was in the format that was on par with the generation. And in that generation, by the way, the average person was, was totally ignorant, there were the yeshiva light, the yeshiva students that were very well educated, that we should only be so worthy to be at their toenails, right? But, the massive populace, a lot of them couldn't read and write. Right? But when Torah was at that level, so those great people knew it and accessed it, and it was in their language. And then as the Jewish the Torah also went down to them and took on the form of the Gemara, took on the form of the Rishonim, took on the form of the Achronim, right? And so the Torah started being expressed in these terms, parallel to the Madrega of the Revelation. And why? The Torah should have been forgotten. If Torah is such a big heavenly thing, only people like Moshe and Rabbi Akiva could understand. What hope do we have? No, because Torah is forcing its way down to the Jewish people. The momentum of Matan Torah, Vayered Hashem Har Sinai, has not ceased. And that's how Torah is pushing towards revelation. It's pushing down towards revelation in the lower realm. And that's how we could have this phenomenon that lower generations have access to Divrei Torah that were very, wide access to Divrei Torah that were very hidden and very encoded in an earlier generation. Torah is pushing down, Torah is pushing towards revelation. Now, of course, it's not going to push down and push towards revelation through the vehicle of some idiot, or some mindless, only through the great people of that generation. They will be the antennas to pick up the new revelation of Torah as it's pushing its way downwards from heaven to earth, right? So, of course, this work of being the antennas to receive the new revelation of the transmission, the new shape, the new color, the new way that it looks, of how Torah is emerging and pushing towards emergence, right? It's all the same Torah, but it's pushing to greater emergence, greater clarification, right? It's pushing outwards. So of course, only the great ones of each generation will be the antennas to pick up that transmission of how the Torah itself is pushing towards revelation. This is very parallel to how God himself is pushing destiny towards Tikkun. So, this is the famous question they ask, right? If the earlier generations couldn't bring Mashiach, they couldn't be Zocheh to Mashiach, how are we going to do it, right? But it's the same answer, right? And it's a parallel idea. God is pushing the world towards Tikkun. The world is being pushed to Tikkun. Big generations could accelerate it really quickly, right? But if not, it'll still push us forward. It still pushes forward. The world is pushing towards Tikkun, even if we're very small and we can't finish the job. If the earlier generations couldn't do it, we certainly can do it. The Hashgacha is pushing towards Tikkun, pushing towards Mashiach, pushing towards Tchias HaMesim, right? And the Torah, and it's all in tandem. It's all parallel to the Torah is pushing to being more and more revealed. More and more revealed. Matan Torah never stopped. Right? In one grand instant, the title of ownership of Torah shifted, but the revelation of everything that was encoded in that, is constantly unfolding. That's the secret. Look at Torah's perpetually new, because it is perpetual. There's always new revelations. And that process happens despite the fact that the generations are on a lower level. As long as we have amongst us our few exceptional ones, right? Even if they're not as exceptional as the generations that came before them. But now the Ramchal writes in a letter that sometimes because the Torah is forcing to come to a revelation, it will actually force certain people to be bigger than what their generation, what would have been the average or the general, exceptional level of their generation. They're even higher than that, right? Glaring examples, the Arizal and his generation, right? The Vilna Gaon, the Baal Shem Tov, the Ramchal. These people were much bigger than their exceptional peers. So like there was the top 10%. These guys weren't just one other member of the top 10. They were way above that. And the Ramchal says that the need for the Torah to come out, so you need someone super big. So someone is chosen and his intelligence and his spiritual is augmented for this mission because Torah is pushing forward. Ramchal writes that in a letter. Right? So, our Torah went through, in its course of being revealed, right? And it shouldn't be confused with being diluted. It's wrong what people say. It is true that as the generations go down, the Torah has to take on another form that's appropriate to the mind of that generation. I stress another form. It's all an issue of formatting. It's all the same Torah. It's how it's expressed. It's how it's written up. And it's also spelling out certain things that you could expect people to figure out for themselves in earlier generations, right? And it's like revealing certain details that those details didn't need to be revealed because the people would figure it out themselves, right? Right, but but there's also could be like new details that were previously very hidden or not very well explained. It's part of the process of how Torah is pushing forward, like destiny is pushing forward for the just like pushing towards the revelation of God's Melech al Kol Haaretz that we try to accelerate by coronating him on Rosh Hashanah, New Year. We're pushing the wheel of destiny forward by a year, but we hope to do it not just one more year forward, right? But coronate him. We hope every Rosh Hashanah that could be the coronation that will finish the tikkun of moving destiny to V'Hashem L'Melech Al Kol Haaretz, V'Mi Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad, right? And so just like the wheel of destiny is moving forward, that happens in a giant leap by every Rosh Hashanah, that's moving towards the great coronation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So also Torah, his law, is pushing towards its revelation. And one of the fields, that really was previously very, very, cryptic, right? And very hidden and encoded in the Agadotas is the place. That's where they were. So you might ask them, listen, we have to be able to connect any Torah we hear from anybody to the Talmud, right? The Talmud was the final corpus of what's called the Torah. And, even though we've added to that corpus, but you can only add to it if it stims with it. We show that whatever is added is perfectly consistent with the Talmud. If it fits with the Talmud, you could ratify it. You could accept it as being an extension of Torah. Now, we accept the Torah of the Rishonim and the Achronim and the Shulchan Aruch, right? Because it all stims with the Talmud Bavli, right? The same thing through with our philosophy. Where is our philosophy in the Talmud Bavli, right? So now we have the Zohar, right? And so okay, now even the Zohar, right? Why was it widely accepted when it was publicized? So we believe parts of it were access. It didn't come out of nowhere. There's a lot of research that the Rambam had access to pieces of the Zohar. The Radziner started the research, and Reuven Margos cranked up to another level with his Kuntras, Rambam V'Zohar. There are indications. Rashi and the Ramban had bits and pieces of the Zohar, so they knew what it was, right? But it's more than that. But it's like so much chachma. Where is that in the Gemara? Answer is in the Agadata. The Agadotas, these stories that we just don't know how to handle. We wonder why they're even written in the Gemara. I mean, God forbid, right? Cynics wonder why is this stuff even in the Talmud. There were some original reforms, some maskilim that said, listen, Talmud's a good book, but it's Agadata stuff. Why is it there? And God forbid, right? God forbid. That was the form that our philosophy took on. Our philosophy includes our metaphysics, our view of the cosmos, our understanding of how the universe is constructed and how the Torah would fit on reality like a glove, and the human being also is built on that same scale, and that's why the Taryag mitzvahs connecting a person's Ramach Evarim Shesag Gidim is exactly what you need to fix the man and fix the cosmos. All these things, are encoded in the Agadata. But that was the form that it took on. Back in the day, we didn't. The first normal Jewish philosophy book was the Emunas V'Deser of Saadia Gaon, right? And even then, he was forced to draw on sources from philosophy, the Kalam in particular. The time to fully decode what's encoded in the Agadatas had not yet come. Right? And a lot of times the Agadatas, people were mystified in how to approach them, and they try to explain them with philosophy, still very loosely, metaphorically, and in the spirit of philosophy, whatever philosophical school they were using, right? The Agadata was, and we believe that the Agadata sufficed for the Torah learning of the Tanoim and the Amoraim, right? Not so for us, right? We needed the Zohar, right? And we needed, what the Arizal then unlocked from the Zohar, right? we couldn't handle just pull out the details ourselves, right? But of course, that needing that extra help for us cosmically means Torah now is more revealed. It's more revealed. Our needing more explanation means Torah is now more revealed, and that's the process God wants. So this brings us to the Maharal. All this introduction is necessary to get an appreciation, right? The whole field of Jewish philosophy, written as philosophy, talking about what certain ideas mean, not just issues of halacha. This is the halacha, but ideas of morals, virtues, things that we call metaphysics, cosmic ideas, right? That was locked away in the Yahrtzeit. And it started coming out a little bit, little by little, right? Everything appropriate, everything generationally appropriate, right? The Yahrtzeit, we believe, was adequate for those generations when the Yahrtzeit was compiled, right? And also for the amount of people learning at the time, right? And then, the Torah's, reformats, same Torah, reformats, in parallel to the time and to the needs of Am Yisrael, and with the overall agenda of just moving towards greater revelation. So, our philosophy started, taking on the form of philosophy books that talk about these topics openly and not in the metaphor of the Yahrtzeit. It started with Sadia Gaon, right? It got a serious kick forward with the Rambam. And the Rambam warns us in his Pirush HaMishnayos, when he gives us introduction to the Talmud, don't make light of Yahrtzeit. It's very, very deep. Don't make fun of it. It's super deep. You're just making fun of yourself, right? If you make fun of Yahrtzeit, right? And the Rambam worked very hard to decode as much as he was able to, right? Using the language of the Greek philosophers, using their language, right? But as we've explained elsewhere, he used that as a vehicle to what he honestly believed for sure, and what many believe, like my Rebbe Moshe Shapira, is Das Torah, just having the Das Torah encloaked in those terms that he borrowed from Greek philosophy. And then those terms, he wrote them in Judeo-Arabic, came the Ibn T-Bones, and they created a philosophical dictionary for us. They created words based on the Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim. I mean, they did it for Sadia Gaon also, but with the Rambam, they took it to a whole nother level. The Ibn T-Bone. So Shmuel and then his son, Rav Moshe Ibn T-Bone, they created a philosophical dictionary for us based on how the Rambam Judaicized the Greek terms, and then they took those Judeo-Arabic terms, made them in Hebrew, and those words became the language of the Maharal. The Maharal is, his terms, Havaya, Heder, Siba, Mesuva, and all the different terms that he uses. It's Ibn T-Bone's, so even though the Maharal differed with the Rambam on a lot of issues of philosophy, not all. The Maharal thought for himself. He didn't, let's say, just side with the Ramban over the Rambam card like many Kabbalistically inclined people do. He picked and chose. He was his own man, right? I could think of a few instances, right? But he did differ with the Rambam very much, particularly with the Ramah's approach to Kabbalah. It's trying to synthesize it with the Moreh Nevuchim, mamish, calling it just a difference in language, literally. The Maharal came out against it and said they're as different as east to west, Kabbalah and philosophy, but he does use the language of philosophy to explain Kabbalah. So the Ramah said they're the same, they're just a difference in language, the Ramah and the Torah Sola. The Maharal came out against that, but he comes out against it, but what does he do? So ideologically, Kabbalah and philosophy are as far as east and west, but he takes the language of philosophy created by the Ibn T-Bones and uses it to explain Kabbalah. So now I always say the Maharal wrote the book the Rambam wanted to and despaired of writing. And again, this goes back to the idea everything in its time and its place, and certain revelations are only for certain generations. The Rambam writes in the in his Hakdama Chelek, he writes this Pirush HaMishnayos is the first book he wrote, right? So he lays out his plans where he's going to write, in the future. He was a young man at the Pirush HaMishnayos. And, and one of the things he planned was to explain a book explaining Agadata. He had written in his Hakdama the Brachos, this stuff is deep, and this is our philosophy, but it's written in code, to hide it from the fools, right? To hide it from the uninitiated, to hide it from people that shouldn't have access. Because at the time, that's what we're saying, Torah, pushed towards greater revelation. In earlier generations, part of, it was also not just certain things weren't revealed in detail yet. They were left in cloud for people to derive the product, but also parallel to that was also as far as quantity of students being secretive, that not every learner should have access to it all, right? That was all part of the general gist of Torah being still more concealed, which, transitioned to more concealment to greater revealment, like we explained. All right, so the Rambam says, I'm going to write a book explaining the Agadatas. He writes that in his Hakdama L'Chelik, right? Comes at the end of his life. The last book he wrote was the Moreh Nevuchim, and he says that thing about the Agadatas, no can do, because I asked myself, what should I do? Right, I'm going to reveal what Chazal wanted to keep hidden. I can't do that. They wanted to keep it hidden. Who am I to reveal? So what I'm going to do? I'm going to give it over in code. I'll create my own code. So he said, what did I gain? I exchanged their code for my code, right? He said, but some of the stuff that I was going to write will be in this book, in the Moreh Nevuchim, right? That book that the Rambam wanted to write and felt he just couldn't is the book that the Maharal wrote. So aside from the Maharal giving us a tremendous, voluminous library of philosophy, right? A field that was, very, very underdeveloped, historically, and still by his time, many books had been written, right, since Rav Saadia Gaon, but still is, how he wrote, and he didn't even write all the books he intended. There was a book on Shabbos he never got around to writing. There was a book on Sukkot he never got around to writing. But you have, Gvurus Hashem on Pesach, and which covers a lot of philosophy. There are Tiferes Yisrael on Shavuos, but it's not just Shavuos. It's also a lot of things Torah related, Torah learning related, and mitzvahs, nature of mitzvahs related, right? And the Netzach on the Golus and Geula, right? And the the Beragol explaining the hard Agadatas, the hard Chazals, right? And the and above all the Chidushei Agadas themselves, right? And they're Chaim and Ovis, right? Unbelievable, voluminous, like in one grand instant, the whole field of Jewish philosophy got blessed with a wealth of material, right? But here's the interesting thing. It is literally the book that the Rambam really wanted to write and just felt he couldn't, at least not at that time and not at that, under those circumstances, because the Maharal kept it all connected to the source. The Maharal wrote books and a big philosophy, right? Big philosophy, right? But it's all built around Agadata, which in itself is the greatest sign that this stuff wasn't made up, right? It's not speculation. It's rooted in the Agadata, right? The Agadata is the reason, like I said, when the Zohar popped up, so even people who didn't have the privilege of being access, to its bits and pieces that everyone did have, not everyone, no. The select people had, like we mentioned earlier in this presentation, right? But the learning community understood this Zohar stems with this field of Agadata. It's all the same science, right? Right. So the Maharal, by sometimes it's a little bit choppy, that he doesn't want to just write chapters of just his thoughts like the Ramchal does, right? He wants to build around Agadata. But in sort of way that shows the validity. It shows that it has its source in the Talmud Bavli. It's showing that this is not speculative. This is revealing what Chazal were trying to hint to us. And just the Maharal was at the right time and right place in history to push the revelation forward. The Rambam felt he couldn't do it. He revealed whatever he could in the Moreh Nevuchim. The Maharal wrote that book the Rambam wanted to write. And he didn't just do it here and there, voluminous. But even in the Maharal, you could see how he's limited because he was pushing to as much as the Hashgacha would allow him to reveal. And it's a special type of revelation. In the words of Rav Hutner, the Maharal was the first to put Nister B'Loshen Nigla. Nister B'Loshen Nigla. It's all Kabbalah. It's all Kabbalah. That's where he criticizes, even though I'm using philosophical jargon, I'm not like the Ramah. The Ramah is synthesizing Kabbalah and philosophy. I hold they're very different, right? But he uses the language of philosophy to capture Kabbalah. So the two disciplines, onto their own different, but he'll use the language of one to capture the other. Use the language of the West to capture the East, right? Which is an amazing thing. That's why I always say jokingly, everyone mentions Ramchal and Maharal in the same breath, right? Not just because they ring together, Maharal, Ramchal, and they lived a few hundred years apart, right? About 200 years apart, right? But but they're part of the same revolution. Just the Maharal lived before the revelation of the Ari, which pushed the revelation of Sisrei Torah, which includes the Jewish philosophy, quantum leaps forward. But it was revealed in Zohar type language, even though he used Hebrew, but it's Hebrewization of the Zohar terms. And we needed a Ramchal to do to the Ari what the Maharal did to the Agadata. But the Maharal started the process, because that's what the Ramchal is all about also, taking the Torah of the Ari, which is fantastic revelations that were previously very, very hidden. People hadn't known stuff from the Ari since Rav Shimon Bar Yochai himself. Right, so all that's fantastically revealed, and we believe that it's the Torah because it fits on the Zohar like a glove. So whether the Rashbi was fully conscious of everything the Ari expelled out or not, it does fit on his Zohar like a glove. So that's why we know it's legit. Just like we know that we should accept the Rashba because everything he says fits on the Talmud Bavli. Right, so the Ari, everything he says fits on the Zohar. Right. But it still needs to be explained. That's what the Ramchal did for the Ari, and the Maharal did for all Kabbalah, the classical Kabbalah before the Ari. He did for it what the Ramchal did for the Ari, and put it all B'Loshen Nigla, which is another. It's a form of revelation, making it putting it in other terms that a lower generation could have access to. So as much as I'm a low guy, I need it, but look at from the Torah's point of view, it's called the Torah now is more revealed. It's part of the process of Matan Torah, has been advanced, and has advanced, which by no coincidence comes up redundantly. This is Parsha. Every day should be like new. Torah is perpetually new. It's not old. It's always new. We just have to always every day give new eyes and new ears. Shama tishma'u. You have to. Torah is always written, double. Chazal says, "Tishma b'yosham, tishma b'chorosh." Listen well to the old stuff, and then you'll hear new stuff. You'll hear newness in the old stuff, because Torah is always pushing towards revealing something that was prior to that concealed from the average mind, even though it was all encoded in the Torah that we were given title to on Shavuos. But it goes from being encoded to being fully decoded and totally revealed. And the Maharal is such a quantum leap forward in this process. But like going back to it, he was like pushing as far as he can get. And that's why he writes sometimes, V'yev shalafarash. He said, I can't explain more. V'amevin yovid, V'yev shalafarash. And that's why he also repeats himself. He just can't find the right words. He wants to say an extension of the idea, but he can't find the new words to adequately say. So he repeats himself. Right? It's so, apparent. He was pushing to get as far as he can get. And it gave us a Marashal Adiris, the Torah of the Maharal is right up there with the Mar Nevuchim of the Rambam, that even, totally accepted as being, consistent with the Kabbalah or not. It's the Rambam, so it's timeless, right? We're always going to learn that. To learn the Mar Nevuchim, like we're always going to learn the Mishnah Torah. It's not going to be a cyclical book, sometimes in, sometimes out, right? Fad in, fad out. There's like certain things that are like staples that they're, interest, let's say, in Sefer Ikram of Albo or of, good stuff there. And Munas V'Deis, that's cyclical. And if a person never learned it, of course he's missing that beautiful work, but, he could still get by as a Ben Torah and as a Baal Machshava also. But without Rambam, can you live without Rambam? You can't live without Maharal. To understand what Agadata means, to have a shaykhs to what Agadata means, to have a shaykhs to, the whole system of Torah thought, the Maharal has a timeless place, right? In a main, what like the Rambam, Rif and Rosh are to halacha, right? The Beis Yosef says that those are the pillars, right? And you could add and detract from other, add, subtract from other Rishonim, based on the Shiloh, whether you really need them or not, or when there's a little bit of gray area, Maharal's up there. It's like one of the things, together with, Ramban al Torah, together with, the philosophy of the Rambam, right? mainstay. But it was such a great revelation of in Gilui HaTorah, in such a special form, that as new as it was still rooted in Agadata, it was rooted in the original source, right? The amazing thing, right? As new as it was rooted directly, he built everything around Agadata. But it's such a voluminous revelation of Torah philosophy, but said in a lashon that fits, a lashon that's been timely already for over 500 years. Right, those lashonos originally coined by the Ibn Tibons, through the influence of the Rambam. He used those and they wove them together, and it worked. Right? We're still learning Maharal today. So even though later, after there was the Ramchal, and then there was Rav Isaac Chover, and Naftali Herz Halevi, dare I say Rav Kook also, but in his own special style, that also worked towards this, putting Nister Beloshin Nigla. The Maharal never lost his prominence in that whole movement. And even though it's not even the Torah of the Ari, it's all the Kabbalah up to the Ari, right? Although there are people say that there are things that the Maharal figured out from the Torah of the Ari. He didn't learn by the Guri Ari. They're living at about the same time, right? He didn't know from the Ari in his lifetime, right? There's a lot of things he figured out, but so the Maharal, even though he's pre-Ari, never lost his relevance. Ad hayom hazeh. It's like a Rambam can never lose its relevance, right? So we have to continue the revolution further, and I understand it was Min HaShamayim. I couldn't make to its kever, for today, because I have to bring his living Torah instead of going to the place of, his the resting place of his guf. But rather, my job is to have svas of those together, to bring the body back to life and have his lips moving, right? And bring his living Torah to Plano, Texas this weekend. With going to Be'ez Hashem, give over in course of our 4 days there. The major Yisrael from the whole Nesiv HaTshuva. Zchuso Yogen Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael. How do we end the year? Call to everybody.